My name is Barbara Anderson. I'm 34 years old, and I balance books for a living. So believe me when I say I know, down to the penny, what 6 years of marriage cost me. On a Saturday in September, my husband's phone started ringing and would not stop because his mother was standing at a register at the mall with a cart full of things she hadn't paid for, holding his bank card, and the card had just been declined. My mother-in-law wasn't scared. She wasn't embarrassed. She was furious, and she called him to yell about it. He drove home ready to blame me. He'd had 6 years of practice. But what was waiting for him on our kitchen table? What I had built in the 48 hours before that call. None of them saw coming. Not him. Not her. Not anyone in my family. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet women tell the stories nobody believed until it was too late. If you have ever had to prove yourself in your own home, this one is for you. Drop a comment below, tell me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe because you won't want to miss how this one ends. To make sense of that kitchen table, I have to take you back 6 months, to March. I met Daniel Anderson when I was 27, at a fundraiser for the community college where I'd earned my first accounting credits. He was a construction project manager with sawdust on his sleeve and a habit of remembering small things. He remembered I liked my coffee bitter. He remembered my father's knee surgery. I mistook that for devotion, and to be fair, I just hadn't asked yet where all that devotion had been trained. We married when I was 28 and bought a tired little house in Kettering, outside Dayton, Ohio. I loved that house the way you love a rescue dog. I sanded its floors on my knees. I repainted the kitchen twice because the first yellow looked like caution tape. I built us a budget the way I build everything, in neat columns, because I'm a senior accountant at a parts manufacturer, and columns are how I stay calm. My dad fixed roofs. My mom ran a register at a grocery store for 30 years. Nobody handed me anything, and I never minded that. You trust what you built yourself, and I trusted our life. Daniel used to sit on the porch steps while I did the monthly numbers, and he'd say, "Marry an accountant. Sleep like a baby." For a while, that was true. We slept fine. The numbers behaved. But I'll tell you something they don't teach you in any bookkeeping course. Every ledger has a line where the numbers stop adding up, no matter how careful you are. It took me 6 years to accept that ours did too, and that the line had a name on it. The name was Lorraine. My mother-in-law was 63, widowed 8 years, and she lived 15 minutes away in the old family house where Daniel grew up. If you met her at church, you'd think she was the warmest woman in Montgomery County. She brought casseroles to strangers. She remembered every birthday in the congregation. Then she'd come to my house on a Sunday, walk into my kitchen, and rearrange my cabinets while I stood there holding a dish towel. "Mugs by the stove, Barbara," she'd say. "That's how a kitchen works." She never raised her voice. She just corrected my life the way you'd correct a child's homework patiently, in pen. She called my husband my Danny, always with the "my" in front, like a brand burned on a calf. And she had a key to our house. Daniel gave it to her before our wedding. "A spare key on a red ribbon, for emergencies," he said. I want you to notice something about Lorraine's emergencies, because it took me longer than it should have. There was the emergency of the dripping faucet discovered on a Tuesday afternoon, the emergency of the package on the porch, a Friday, the emergency of checking whether we'd left the oven on, which we had not, another Tuesday. Every single one of her emergencies happened between 9 and 5, on days when Daniel was on a job site and I was at the office. Not once did an emergency strike while either of us was home. I mentioned that pattern to Daniel once, lightly, the way you test ice before you put your weight on it. He laughed and kissed my forehead. "That's just Mom," he said. The ice held that day. I made a note of the crack anyway. The first number that lied to me showed up in March, in the joint checking account. I reconcile our accounts on the first Sunday of every month. Coffee on the left, laptop in front, receipts on the right. That Sunday, there was a cash withdrawal I didn't recognize, made on a Friday afternoon at a branch across town, $180. Not a fortune. Just wrong. Here's what people don't understand about accountants. We don't panic at a wrong number. We get quiet. I checked it 3 times. I pulled the receipts twice. I went through my own wallet like a customs agent because I have been trained my whole life to assume the error is mine until proven otherwise. It wasn't mine. So I asked Daniel, and I kept my voice easy, the way you'd ask about weather. He answered fast. Too fast, like a man stepping over a puddle he already knew was there. I gave Mom a little for her prescriptions, he said. She didn't want to bother you. I nodded and let it go that night. And then, because I can't help myself, I looked at the number again on Monday. Prescriptions come in amounts. Copays are $20, $45, maybe $90 for the brand name ones. Pharmacies print receipts. His mother's emergency medicine had somehow cost $180 even, in cash, at a bank branch 2 blocks from her hairdresser, at an hour when Daniel had been pouring concrete in Beaver Creek with 12 men watching. The math didn't match the story. When a number and a story disagree, one of them is lying, and in 12 years of audits I have never once caught a number in a lie. I closed the laptop. I started paying attention. In April, it happened again. $240 this time. Same branch, same Friday pattern, and this time I didn't ask easy. I printed the statement and set it on the counter next to his dinner, which is the closest thing an accountant has to a declaration of war. Daniel looked at the highlighted line for a long moment. And then my husband, the man who watched me find a 9-cent error in a client's books and celebrate like it was a playoff win, said, "Did you miscount?" I want to be honest about what that question did. I've been called stubborn. I've been called cold, mostly by people who wanted something from me. But no one had ever suggested I couldn't count. It was the one thing about me that had never been up for debate, the skill I'd built my whole life on, and he reached for it first, before he reached for the truth. Because the truth was standing in his mother's kitchen frosting a cake. I didn't yell. I asked him to sit down, and I laid it out like a quarterly review. If your mother needs help, I said, we help her. On the books, planned, both of us signing off. And the key comes back. She doesn't get to be in our house when we're not in it. He rubbed his face with both hands, and out came the sentence I would hear so many times I could have had it engraved. She's my mother. What am I supposed to do? He said it like a man showing me his empty pockets. But he promised. He'd get the key back that weekend, he said. He'd talk to her. I marked it in my head the way I mark a pending transaction. Promised, not posted. Lorraine's birthday dinner was the last Sunday in April. 14 people around the long table in the house where Daniel grew up. She was radiant that night, telling stories about the family. And I noticed, the way you notice a draft, that I did not exist in a single pronoun. It was always we drove to the lake, my kids and me, our family, this house. 6 years in, and I was furniture. Then her sister asked, sweetly, whether Barbara might host Thanksgiving this year, and the table went just quiet enough. Lorraine smiled at me, patted my hand, twice, soft as a stamp coming down on a form, and said, "Oh, honey, you're not family, dear. You're just who he married." She said it with sugar on it. That's the part people never believe, that a sentence like that can be served warm, like pie, and a whole table will laugh because the tone told them it was a joke, even though every woman in that room heard exactly what it was. I laugh too. I'm not proud of that. You laugh because the alternative is standing up at a birthday dinner and becoming the villain of a story that has already been written and captioned without you. Daniel laughed with his mouth full and squeezed my knee under the table, which I believe he genuinely thought was loyalty. Only one person at that table didn't laugh. Susan, Daniel's younger sister, in from Columbus, sat very still with her fork halfway down and looked at me for a long time, the way you look at someone standing on train tracks. I didn't understand that look yet. I filed it, the way I file everything. It would take until September for that particular receipt to make sense. In May, I did the thing you're supposed to do, the calm, boring, adult thing. I opened an account in my own name at a different bank and moved my direct deposit into it. I didn't hide it. I told Daniel at the kitchen table with the paperwork in front of us, and I kept my share flowing into the joint account for the mortgage, the utilities, the insurance. Every bill got paid, to the dollar, same as always. I wasn't taking money out of the marriage. I was putting a door on my half of it. You'd have thought I'd filed for divorce that afternoon. Daniel went quiet in the way that meant he'd already talked to his mother, and within a week, Lorraine had a new name for me. She debuted it at a cookout, to a cousin, in that carrying voice she saved for things she wanted overheard. "Well, you know how it is now," she said. "Danny works himself to the bone and the wife hides money." The wife. I stood 10 feet away holding a bowl of potato salad I had made from her recipe because I was still trying then, and I understood something with the kind of clarity that usually only comes off a spreadsheet. In this family, there was no move I could make that would read as self-respect. Protecting myself was theft. Asking questions was disrespect. Even my paycheck, the one I earned before I ever met her son, was family property that I was withholding. Those were the rules, and nobody had voted on them, and nobody was going to. I drove home that night, my own house, 15 minutes, and I remember thinking, with a strange calm, that rules nobody voted on are the easiest ones to stop obeying. June, believe it or not, was almost sweet. The withdrawals paused. Lorraine cooled off, or seemed to. And then a package walked off our porch. A set of drill bits Daniel had ordered, gone in broad daylight, the second theft on our street that month according to the neighborhood group. Daniel was furious in the uncomplicated way men get about tools, and when I suggested a doorbell camera, he agreed before I finished the sentence. I want that on the record. The camera was his idea as much as mine, bought to catch a porch pirate, installed on a Saturday with him whistling on the ladder and me handing up screws. For a few weeks, our house felt like ours. We cooked. We drove out to the lake on a Sunday instead of going to dinner at his mother's, and the sky did not fall. I let myself do the dangerous thing, the thing careful women ration like sugar. I hoped. I made him his grandmother's meatloaf as a peace offering, and we ate it on the porch under our new little camera, and he held my hand and said, "We were okay." I ran the numbers that night, and they balanced, and I chose to believe the ledger and the man at the same time. Here's what I know now. The camera was supposed to catch a porch thief. It caught my marriage instead. Let me pause right here for 1 second. If you have ever sat at your own kitchen table feeling like a guest in your own house, tell me in the comments where you're listening from, because I read them. And it helps more women than you'd think. And if you know that feeling of checking a number 3 times because nobody ever checks on you, go ahead and subscribe. The next part of this story is where the numbers stopped lying to me and started testifying. July ended the truce. The withdrawals came back, smaller and smarter, like they'd been to a seminar. $310 from a branch near the mall, $150 in cash back at a grocery store, $95 here, $410 there, the boldest one yet. Little cuts, spread out, the kind a busy couple wouldn't notice, except one half of this couple reconciles accounts for a living and had started keeping a private tracking sheet in a folder that lived in my work bag, not on the kitchen counter. I logged each one. Date, time, location, amount, and whose story was attached to it, because there was always a story. Daniel needed cash for the crew lunch. Mom's water heater. "It's from my overtime, Barb. Why are you like this?" I stopped asking out loud and let the sheet do the asking. By the first week of August, the pattern was so clean it was almost beautiful, the way fraud always is right before it's caught. Every unexplained transaction fell on a Tuesday or a Friday. The 2 days Daniel's crew ran late pours, and I closed the month-end books at the office. The 2 days our house stood empty from 9 to 6, guaranteed, like a posted schedule. Now, banks flag patterns like that with software. Wives flag them with a highlighter at midnight, alone, feeling like a crazy person for auditing their own life. The running total crossed $1,000 that month. I sat with the sheet in front of me and made myself say the quiet part in my own head. This isn't leaking. This is scheduled. Somebody with a key and a calendar was drawing a salary from my marriage. The cash came out of machines with a card and a pin, and Daniel's pin, I'd teased him about it for years, was his mother's birthday. I just couldn't prove who was picking the lock, because whoever it was never used the front door while the camera. And then I stopped. The camera. We'd had that camera almost 6 weeks, and I had never once scrolled its history, because we bought it to catch strangers, and it dutifully alerted us about delivery drivers and one very committed raccoon. Until the raccoon won, and I silenced the notifications back in July. But the app keeps everything for 60 days. So on a Wednesday night in August, with Daniel asleep upstairs, I sat in the dark kitchen and went backward through the footage like an auditor going back through a fiscal year. It took me 40 minutes to find it. Tuesday, 14 minutes past 2 in the afternoon. A silver sedan I knew as well as my own car pulls into our driveway, calm as a mail truck. Lorraine gets out. She's carrying her purse and wearing the good lavender cardigan, church quality, and she walks up our steps like a woman with an appointment. Then she takes out a key on a red ribbon, the very key Daniel swore to me he'd taken back from her in April, and I actually watched. My mother-in-law let herself into my locked house at 2 in the afternoon while both of us were at work. No knock, no call. The door just closed behind her. Polite as you please. I sat there in my dark kitchen watching the timestamp run. 5 minutes, 15, 30. At 2:54 she came back out, pulled the door shut, checked the handle like a professional, and drove away. 40 minutes inside my home. And here is the detail that kept me up until 3, the one I turned over and over like a bad invoice. She came out carrying nothing. No casserole dish she'd dropped off. No package she'd rescued. Empty hands. So what, exactly, does a woman do alone in your house for 40 minutes? The next evening, I told Daniel I had a headache, skipped his crew's softball game, and searched my own house like I was executing a warrant on my own life. You have to understand, nothing was missing. That's why it worked for so long. Missing gets noticed. Moved gets doubted. In our bedroom, my nightstand drawer sat a half-inch prouder than I leave it, and I leave it flush, because I'm the kind of person who leaves drawers flush. The file tote in the closet, where I keep our tax returns, had its folders leaning left. I keep them leaning right. In my desk, the envelope from my new bank, my personal account, the statement addressed to Barbara Anderson only, had been opened and glued shut again, just slightly proud along the flap, the way paper never lies flat twice. She knew. She'd read my balance. And on my dresser, my perfume, the good one Daniel bought me in Chicago, stood with its cap seated crooked, a quarter turn loose, and the level lower than I remembered. She hadn't stolen it. She'd used it, worn me around the house, or around town, like a coat she was thinking of buying. I didn't touch anything after that. I got my phone and photographed every drawer, every folder, every flap, with the date stamped in the corner, and I wrote it all into the tracking sheet with the same steady hands I use for other people's audits, because that's what my hands know how to do when the rest of me is shaking. Then I sat on the edge of my own bed like a guest in a hotel, and I understood her. Lorraine wasn't searching for anything. She was taking inventory of the assets, of the paperwork, of the marriage. I showed Daniel the footage on a Sunday morning, before coffee, because I wanted his real face and not his rehearsed one. I got both. For 3 full seconds, watching his mother let herself into our house with a key that wasn't supposed to exist, my husband looked exactly as sick as he should have. I saw it. That's what made everything after worse, knowing he saw it too. Then the shutters came down, and he said, and I am quoting him precisely, "She was probably just watering the plants. We do not own a single house plant." I pointed this out. He said maybe she'd dropped something off. I showed him her empty hands. He said there had to be an explanation, which was the first true thing he'd said, and then he went and got one. He called her, right there, on speaker, and his mother turned on the tears like a faucet with good pressure, sobbing that she'd felt so far from him lately, that Barbara was building walls, that she'd only wanted to feel close to her family, and now she was being treated like a criminal. He was apologizing to her before she finished the second sentence. To her. She's my mother, he told me afterward, wrung out on the couch like he was the one who'd been burgled. What am I supposed to do? And that might have been the morning I still could have been talked down, if it had ended there. It didn't. By Wednesday, 2 women from her church had reached out to Daniel to say they were praying for him because they'd heard things were hard at home with his cold wife. She'd been robbed on Sunday, according to her. By Wednesday, she was the victim. Here's the part I'm least proud of, so let's get it over with. After that Sunday, I doubled down on the one strategy that had never once worked. I decided I didn't have enough proof. You have to laugh. A little. I had a spreadsheet with a 4-figure total. I had timestamps, photographs, footage of an unauthorized entry with a key that officially didn't exist. Any auditor on Earth would have closed the file and issued findings. But I wasn't auditing a company. I was pleading with a jury of 1 man, and every time the verdict came back, she's my mother, I concluded the problem was my evidence and went looking for more. That's the trap they don't warn you about when you're a careful woman. You're not family, dear, Lorraine had told me at that birthday table, sweet as pie filling. You're just who he married. I'd hear that sentence in my head at night while I highlighted statements, and instead of hearing what it meant, the case is closed, the verdict came pre-printed. I treated it like a challenge. I'd outdocument her. When the file was thick enough, he'd have to see. So in the middle of all that, I did one small thing that felt like nothing at the time. I was updating our account alerts online, and I flipped Daniel's debit card over, and on the back, in blue ink smaller than a fortune cookie, was the bank's fraud line, available around the clock. I copied that phone number into my tracking sheet, top corner, the way you note an emergency exit in a building you don't trust. I didn't have a plan for it. I want that understood. I just wrote it down. Accountants don't throw away numbers. Sometimes the numbers wait for you. The second Saturday in August, I drove to the office supply store for printer ink, and I came home with a gray fireproof lockbox, the kind you buy for passports and birth certificates. Steel, 2 keys, small enough to carry and heavy enough to mean it. I hadn't planned to buy it. I stood in that aisle a long time. Buying a safe for your marriage certificate is one thing. Buying a safe because your mother-in-law reads your mail inside your own house, that's a different purchase. And both of us in that aisle knew it, me and the woman I was about to become. Into the box went the tracking sheet, the photographs, printed, a flash drive with every clip of camera footage, labeled by date in my blocky audit handwriting, copies of the bank statements with the withdrawals marked, my passport, while I was at it. Then I did the part that still tells you everything about where my marriage stood in August. I didn't put the box in the closet or the desk or anywhere inside the house my husband and I owned together. I put it in the trunk of my car, under the spare tire cover, because my car was titled in my name alone, and it was the one lockable space in my entire life that Lorraine Anderson did not have a key to. I stood in my own garage with my hand flat on the closed trunk, and I said something out loud, alone, that I have never said in quite the same way since. For 6 years, I kept records to be believed. Nobody believed me anyway. So from now on, I wasn't keeping records to be believed. I was keeping them to be free. The box went everywhere I went after that. I want to tell you my own mother rode in like the cavalry when I finally told her some of it. I drove out to see her in late August, sat at the same kitchen table where I'd done my homework as a kid, and gave her the medium-sized version, the withdrawals, the key, the crying phone calls. My mom, Ruth, is 61 years old, and she loves me more than her own lungs, and here is what she said. She reached across the table, patted my hand, and told me, "Endure it, honey. Men love their mothers. Don't make him choose, because you might not like what he picks." Then she got up to refill my coffee like she'd handed me a recipe. I sat there, and I finally saw it, the whole assembly line. Her mother-in-law had picked apart her housekeeping for 20 years, and my father never said a word, and my mother called that keeping the peace. Her own mother had handed her paycheck to my grandfather every Friday of her working life and called that how it was done. Endure it, Honey wasn't advice. It was an heirloom. It was the same red ribbon key, passed down mother to daughter, to a house where we were permanent guests. And I understood something else, sitting there, something that reorganized my whole childhood in about 4 seconds. I didn't learn bookkeeping in night classes. I learned it watching women like her count everything they weren't allowed to keep. Grocery envelopes, babysitting cash, the emergency 20 folded into a coat pocket. Women in my family have always kept a second set of books. I was just the first one with a career and a lockbox. I drove home, and I did not take her advice. Now, before you decide Daniel was a cardboard villain, I need you to sit with me in the parking lot of a counselor's office on the last Thursday in August, because I was there, and it complicates things, and true stories are complicated. He agreed to marriage counseling. He found the counselor himself, a calm woman named Dr. Novak, with an office full of tissues and rubber plants, and in that first session, my husband said things I'd waited 6 years to hear. He said, "I think I disappear when my mom is upset." He said, "Barbara handles everything, and I've been letting her." He held my hand on the ugly beige couch, and his hand was shaking, and I looked at this big, gentle man who builds things for a living, and I remembered exactly why I married him. Afterward, I sat in my car in the parking lot and cried for 10 minutes, and I want to be accurate about those tears. They weren't grief. They were relief, which is so much more dangerous, because relief is the down payment hope makes right before it buys the whole house. I let myself picture it, the version where he wakes up, the locks get changed, and in 5 years this is a story we tell carefully at dinner parties. Then I looked over at the passenger seat where his phone sat charging, because he'd run back inside to book the next session. The screen lit up. Mom, with a heart next to it, and under her name, 7 missed calls. 7. During one single hour, the first hour in 6 years that her son had spent working on his own marriage. I sat very still. Somewhere across town, an alarm had gone off, and I was married to the snooze button. The first week of September, Susan called me from Columbus. Daniel's little sister and I had always been friendly at a careful distance, 2 women who liked each other across a minefield neither of us had planted. This call was different. She skipped hello. "Barbara," she said, "I need you to hear this from me first. Mom's been on the phone with the aunts all week. She's telling everyone you're stepping out on Danny, that the separate bank account is for sneaking around, that she has a feeling." I stood in my kitchen with a wooden spoon in my hand and the sauce going cold, and honestly, the accusation itself barely landed. It was so lazy, so off the shelf. What landed was the machinery underneath it. I finally saw the sequence the way you see a scheme laid out in a fraud case, step by step. She wasn't gossiping. She was pre-drafting the story of my divorce, assigning me the villain part in advance, so that when everything came apart, the family would already know whose fault it was. The woman was seeding a narrative months ahead of the crime. It was, professionally speaking, immaculate work. Susan's voice dropped then, and she said the thing that kept me staring at the ceiling that night. "Barbara, you're not the first. This is what she does. It's what was done." And then she stopped herself. Hard, like a woman grabbing a door before it slams. "Ask her about 1989 sometime," she said. "Or don't. Just, whatever you're keeping in that careful head of yours, keep keeping it." And she hung up before I could ask a single question, leaving me alone in my kitchen with cold sauce, a burning curiosity, and the number 1989. Our third counseling session never happened. We were in the driveway, keys in Daniel's hand, when his phone rang, and it was a neighbor of Lorraine's. "Mom's having chest pains, she's asking for you. And look, you drop everything for that. Even I dropped everything for that." We spent 4 hours at the emergency room, where the doctors ran every test cardiology has to offer and found a heart in better shape than mine, and discharged her by early evening with a diagnosis of anxiety and a printout about